Luxury cars have always carried a certain allure. Gleaming showroom floors, polished chrome, and the promise of prestige that comes with driving something most people only dream of. But behind the glittering glass windows of the UK's luxury dealerships, a darker truth has been quietly taking shape. Not long ago, Happier Cars was the name on everyone's lips. It looked legitimate, trustworthy, even aspirational. Customers believed they were handing over their Range Rovers, BMWs, and Teslas to a reputable dealership. Instead, many watched their vehicles vanish, and their money with it. I'm Brand Guy, and today we're going beyond Happier Cars. Because as shocking as that collapse was, it wasn't an isolated incident. It was just one chapter in a growing story about how the very system of consignment dealerships in Britain has been abused, manipulated, and in some cases, weaponized against the very clients it was meant to serve. This isn't just about one company's fall from grace. It's about a pattern that stretches across multiple dealerships, from flashy London showrooms to regional brokers who promised the world and delivered nothing but heartache. Happier Cars may have been the spark, but when you step back and connect the dots, you see an entire industry plagued with the same tactics: missing cars, unpaid owners, and court cases that reveal the ugly side of luxury. The world of exotic cars is supposed to represent freedom, wealth, and power. But in the UK, it's also become a breeding ground for some of the most brazen financial scandals of recent years. And if you think Happier Cars was the end of it, think again, because the rabbit hole goes much deeper. To understand how scandals like Happier Cars became possible, you have to look at the business model that fueled their rise: consignment sales. In theory, it's simple. An owner brings their luxury car to a dealer who promises to handle the advertising, the viewings, and ultimately the sale. Once the car is sold, the dealer takes a commission and pays the remaining balance back to the owner. For buyers, it's convenient. For sellers, it seems safer than dealing with strangers on classified ads. On paper, it's a win-win. But in practice, this arrangement created the perfect breeding ground for abuse. Unlike franchise dealerships tied to manufacturers, independent consignment dealers in the UK operate with very little oversight. There's no mandatory escrow system, no regulator ensuring that once a car is sold, the original owner gets their money. Everything comes down to trust. And in a high-value market where single transactions can reach six figures, that trust is worth its weight in gold. During the 2010s, London emerged as a hub for luxury car trading. The city became a magnet for wealthy international buyers, from Middle Eastern royalty to entrepreneurs chasing a status symbol. This boom created fertile ground for independent dealers to thrive. Showrooms popped up across the capital, promising fast sales, premium prices, and a seamless experience. For a time, it worked. Cars moved quickly, dealers gained reputations, and customers kept coming back. Happier Cars entered the scene against this backdrop. To an outsider, it looked no different from dozens of other glossy showrooms offering the same services. It had the cars, the marketing, and the confident pitch. But beneath the surface, it was operating in an industry built on fragile foundations. An industry where trust could be exploited and oversight was almost non-existent. That lack of accountability would prove disastrous not just for Happier Cars clients, but for many others across the UK who walked through similar showroom doors, believing their prized possessions were in safe hands. As the market for luxury cars in the UK expanded, so too did the influence of independent dealerships. What began as a handful of small operations grew into an ecosystem of polished showrooms across London and beyond. These businesses knew how to sell an image. Sleek websites, glossy Instagram feeds, and prime showroom locations gave the impression of stability and success. The formula was always the same: put high-value cars on display, promise quick sales at top prices, and build trust by projecting confidence. Happier Cars followed this blueprint to perfection. It showcased Teslas, BMWs, and Range Rovers as if it were a well-oiled machine of luxury trade. To the average client walking in, the sight of these gleaming vehicles under showroom lights was proof enough that their car and their money would be safe. But Happier Cars was far from alone. Other dealers, like GVE London, also mastered this art of presentation. Their showrooms became hubs for wealthy clients and even celebrities looking to buy or sell exotic cars. For a while, everything seemed to work. What fueled the growth wasn't just appearances, though. It was psychology. Consignment dealers promised what private sellers couldn't: convenience. No awkward negotiations, no haggling with strangers in parking lots, no wasted time. For buyers, these dealerships offered access to cars they couldn't easily find elsewhere, often with financing options that made transactions seamless. In a booming luxury car market, both sides were eager to believe. The trust built by these showrooms created a snowball effect. Each successful deal brought in more referrals. Each flashy social media post reinforced credibility. Before long, independent dealerships weren't just middlemen. They were gatekeepers of the UK's luxury car scene. And the bigger they grew, the more leverage they had. Cars worth hundreds of thousands of pounds were changing hands daily, often with little more than a handshake and a promise. It was a system that looked unstoppable. But beneath the polished branding and glossy cars sat a dangerous truth. These businesses were only as strong as the honesty of the people running them. With no structural safeguards in place, growth didn't just mean more success. It meant bigger risks, higher stakes, and eventually catastrophic losses for those who put their trust in the wrong hands. When you line up the scandals, from Happier Cars to GVE London and other failed dealerships, the similarities are impossible to ignore. These weren't isolated cases of bad luck. They were part of a pattern built on the same tactics repeated over and over again, exploiting a system with no real guardrails. The most common trick was shockingly simple. A dealer would sell a customer's car, pocket the money, and delay payment back to the owner. Sometimes they'd promise that funds were processing or that a buyer had backed out, stringing clients along with half-truths. In other cases, they would use the proceeds from one sale to cover overdue payments owed to someone else, essentially running a miniature Ponzi scheme within the showroom walls. As long as new cars kept coming in, the cycle could be sustained. But the moment sales slowed or debts piled too high, the whole structure collapsed. Then there were the missing cars. Stories surfaced of vehicles, sometimes worth six figures, vanishing without explanation. Owners handed over Ferraris, Range Rovers, even rare models like the white Lexus LFA, only to later discover their cars had been sold off or simply disappeared into thin air. For many, the dealership that once looked like a beacon of trust became the black hole that swallowed their prized possession. What made these scams so effective was the psychology behind them. Clients walking into these showrooms weren't just selling cars, they were handing over symbols of wealth and identity. Dealers understood that emotion and they played on it. A polished image, reassuring words, and a sense of exclusivity created a false comfort. Even savvy clients, including business people and celebrities, found themselves duped. And yet, perhaps the most dangerous factor wasn't the dealerships themselves, but the lack of oversight around them. In the UK, independent consignment dealers weren't bound by strict regulations. There were no legal requirements for escrow accounts, no watchdog ensuring transactions were transparent. It was a market built entirely on trust, and trust was the very thing being exploited. In the end, the scandals weren't just about individual dealers. They exposed the fragility of an entire business model, one that thrived on appearances, preyed on human confidence, and collapsed the moment its promises ran dry. Today, the fallout from these scandals is still rippling across the UK's luxury car market. Happier Cars collapsed under the weight of its debts, leaving behind a trail of angry clients and unanswered questions. GVE London, once considered one of the largest independent dealerships in the country, has been dragged through headlines and courtrooms as customers demand answers for missing money and vanished cars. Smaller dealers have shuttered quietly, often disappearing overnight and leaving owners with nothing but legal paperwork and broken promises. The immediate impact has been one of distrust. For many high-end car owners, the idea of consigning a vehicle through a dealer has gone from standard practice to a calculated risk. Forums, social media groups, and car clubs are filled with warnings. Don't hand over your car without ironclad guarantees. Don't believe glossy marketing. And above all, don't assume the showroom lights mean security. Regulators and law enforcement have faced criticism for being slow to act. While courts have handled individual disputes, there's still no sweeping reform or oversight mechanism that would prevent the same schemes from happening again. For many victims, winning a legal judgment doesn't mean getting their money back. In some cases, the dealerships have already spent it, or the assets have simply vanished. Justice on paper doesn't always translate to justice in reality. Meanwhile, the industry is shifting. Some owners now prefer selling cars directly through private networks, even if it takes longer. Others are turning to digital platforms that promise transparency, secure payment systems, and less reliance on a middleman. But the scars remain. For every new attempt at innovation, there's a lingering sense of doubt. Can any dealer really be trusted after so many high-profile collapses? What's clear is that the UK's luxury car scene is no longer viewed with the same unshakable glamour it once had. The stories of missing cars, unpaid owners, and courtroom battles have cast a long shadow. And in that shadow, the very foundations of trust, once the bedrock of this market, now feel more fragile than ever. The story of Happier Cars was shocking enough on its own, but when placed alongside GVE London and other failed dealerships, it reveals something much larger. This wasn't just about a few bad actors cutting corners. It was about a system that allowed trust to be weaponized, money to vanish, and some of the UK's most prized vehicles to slip into the shadows. For customers, the lesson is clear. The gleam of a polished showroom or the promise of an effortless sale isn't enough to guarantee safety. The real luxury in today's car market isn't a rare model or a custom paint job. It's knowing you can trust the person holding the keys to your vehicle. And in Britain's luxury dealership scene, that kind of trust has become the rarest commodity of all. The question now is whether the industry will adapt. Will regulators step in and close the loopholes that have been exploited for years? Will new platforms and technologies create safer ways to buy and sell high-value cars? Or will history repeat itself as another dealer inevitably follows the same destructive path? For those who lost cars, money, and peace of mind, the damage is already done. But for the rest of us, these stories serve as a warning. Behind the shine of the UK's luxury car market lies a darker side, one where appearances deceive, promises crumble, and the cost of believing the wrong person can run into the millions. I'm Brand Guy, and this has been the story beyond Happier Cars. If you want to see more investigations into the hidden scandals behind the world of business and luxury, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join me for the next deep dive.